We made a video called Buffs That Didn't Help These Pokemon. A video about Pokemon that weren't ignored by Game Freak, that received buffs, yet still weren't able to markedly improve. Well, what greater buff is there than an evolution? When a Pokemon evolves, it's almost always going to be a better version of the Pokemon it evolved from. A more fully realized version that better achieves what the previous stage would have liked to do. Easy example, Garchomp is simply Gabite, but better in every single way because of its stats. There are some examples of previous stages of Pokemon having niches because of a certain trait their evolved counterpart doesn't have. See VGC, where Clefairy is used over Clefable for its Friend Guard ability, but by and large, evolution is a case of Garchomp's improving on Gabites. Even when the change isn't so completely literal, i.e. Pupitar is Rock Ground before evolving into the Rock Dark Tyranitar, the concept remains the same. Additionally, when a Pokemon receives an evolution in a later generation, it feels like a very purposeful, targeted attempt to improve the Pokemon it had evolved from. There are plenty of lame Pokemon, even those that are the final stage evolutions of Pokemon in the same generation. But when you give a Pokemon an evolution in a later gen, it isn't just going through the motions. Once again, it's not these Pokemon being ignored, it's as if Game Freak recognized that. For example, Golbat wasn't going to hack it, and thus created Crobat. That brings us to the anomalies that comprise the subject of this video. The cross-generation evolutions that didn't actually improve the stature of their evolutionary line. Sure, they might have better stats, a cool new ability, whatever, but the sum total of their improvements was not sufficient to meaningfully bolster the standing of what they evolved from. So the opposite of, say, Gliscor or King Gambit, these are the evolutions that didn't help. These Pokemon waited so many years for an upgrade, and we're about to find out why it didn't help. Where does the time go? Oh, this really nice watch. I got this watch from today's video sponsor, Holzkern. I'm glad you asked. Holzkern is an Austrian-based company that produces fine watches and jewelry for both men and women. Look, time efficiency is very important to me, so I always carry a watch. I don't want to check my phone for time because I might end up playing Showdown for hours instead of working, or worse, playing Showdown using the Pokemon in this vid. Luckily, Holzkern has got me covered in that department. My wrist has never looked finer. I swap between the Fall Dusk and the Hapuku depending on my outfit for today. Both go very well with my preferred business casual wear. I wasn't much of a jewelry guy, but Holzkern has definitely made me reconsider wearing them because they're just so nice. Holzkern offers free shipping worldwide, and they ship to the US and Europe in 2 to 5 business days. So if you want 10% off store-wide, you can use my link in the description below. And thank you so much to Holzkern for sponsoring this video. This is perhaps the most iconic example of an evolution that failed to significantly bolster the stature of its line. And yet, funnily enough, when Generation 4 came out, it was actually cause for a great deal of hype. Dusclops, for all its flaws, had been quite viable in Gen 3 OU as a very bulky rapid spin blocker. And here comes an even bulkier version. HP, defense, and special defense all improved. Not only that, but its base attack had gone from Clops' pitiful base 70 to Noir's solid base 100, and Noir could make use of it with access to its stat priority move Shadow Sneak. All seemed poised for the Dusclops line to improve, right? So what went wrong? Well, pretty much everything that went wrong for Duskclops. Dusknoir is a better Dusclops, true, but it does not improve upon the Clops formula significantly enough to overcome Duskclops' many flaws. Remember how we said Noir's HP was better? Yeah, it went from base 40 to 45, which is still absolutely pitiful. Even base 50 wouldn't really help. You can have Titanic defenses out the wazoo, but you can't do much with them if you don't actually have that many hit points. While the hits themselves might not appear to be much, they're still doing more than is comfortable because it's about the percentage of damage, which is naturally going to be higher here. Plus, though Noir's higher defenses are nice, they're also not nice enough, as it's jumped up to base 135 from Clops' base 130. This in and of itself isn't a deal breaker, but the fact that Dusknoir is painfully, agonizingly slow doesn't help matters at all either. Oh yeah, and it's actually 20 base points faster than Dusclops. Cool. So it can come in at a scorching base 45, making it outsped by Hippowdon of all things. Even this still isn't what breaks it for Noir though. No, that comes in the form of its lack of a reliable recovery. Pain Split does not cut it. But wait, you say, what about the Rotom appliances that, come Platinum, completely ended Noir like the bomb from Kiss Me Deadly? They too have a paltry base 50 HP, and their form of recovery is Pain Split, or Rest for that matter. While the Rotom forms also have Levitate, giving them incredible immunities to Earthquake Earthquake, and especially Spikes, and are also quite fast, meaning they are more difficult to overwhelm, especially so because they are also highly adept at actually striking back at the opponent with direct damage from their solid stabs and special attack stats. That's another fault of Noir's, by the way, utter passivity. Will-O-Wisp is a great move and all, but that whole base 100 attack stat is not at all impressive on a defensive Pokemon whose most useful stab move is 40 base power priority. It was so weak, it barely scratched 40% with its so-called super effective hit on offensive Starmie, by no means a bulky Pokemon. Dusknoir's flaws were quickly apparent even in Diamond and Pearl, as it was so easy to wear it down with its horrendous vulnerability to direct and indirect damage alike, and post-Platinum, nobody good would be caught using it in a serious game at all, nor has it done anything of note in any subsequent generations. What was particularly awful about Generation 4 was that Noir had no business in OU, yet its status as a new Gen 4 evolution that seemed to have great qualities made it a perfect noob trap Pokemon, tricking them into thinking it'd be worthwhile, and this kept its usage sufficient to remain in the tier throughout the whole generation, rather than letting it drop to UU, where it would actually be able to do something worthwhile. Overall though, Dusknoir just didn't do enough to improve on Dusclops, making it arguably the most representative of this whole concept. In fact, the only thing Dusknoir brought in terms of improvement for its evolutionary line was to enable Dusclops to carry Eviolite. In VGC, Dusclops is a good Trick Room user in early regional dex formats due to having great bulk with Eviolite and being very slow. Stantler was a pretty good low-tier Pokemon in its first two generations, but with the new direction Generation 4 took everything in, it was clear that its toolkit in both typing and stats alike wouldn't be sufficient to keep up. Despite some neat traits like Intimidate and a surprisingly deep move pool, it just fell completely to the wayside. Its Legends Arceus evolution then, which made its debut in Scarlet and Violet, was a blessed relief, and what's more, it was interesting as it wasn't just a standard case of Stantler but with better stats. It is of course more powerful than Stantler, both attacking stats brought up to a strong base 105, but that's far from all. Wyrdeer is one of those evolutions that's actually slower than its previous stage, following in the tradition of Pokemon like Scizor, Honchkrow, Incineroar, and other Pokemon on this list. The significant drop from base 85 to 65 means it's taking the style in a completely different direction. Indeed, whereas Stantler was a speedier hitter, Wyrdeer is all about bulking out. Its HP and both defenses are improved, and it's not the slight upgrade of Dusclops to Dusknoir either. It received an excellent 30 base stat jump from Stantler's 73 all the way up to a highly impressive 103, while it received 10 to both defenses, defense going from 62 to 72 and special defense from 65 to 75. Perhaps the most fundamental change though was its new typing. Instead of being a pure normal type like Stantler, Wyrdeer fully leans into Stantler's psychic adjacent abilities and was now a half psychic type, meaning goodbye fighting weakness, hello useful resistances to opposing psychic. Plus, this was a rare case of normal typing actually helping defensively, since Wyrdeer was a psychic unafraid of Ghost, while offensively, Wyrdeer would no longer be plagued by a lack of super effective coverage on its stab, since it had the excellent psychic for that. So how did it wind up? Surely it couldn't be worse than Stantler's untiered status, and probably just a bit better, at least something in PU, right? Well yes, and actually even in NU, as early on, Wyrdeer paired with Thwacky's grassy terrain to unleash the terror of its grassy seed, boosting its defense and even giving it a bit of recovery as Wyrdeer set up agility and calm mind, making itself both faster than everything and unbreakable on both sides of the spectrum before it wiped out entire teams with super boosted stab stored power. Forget answering it with psychic immune dark types either, as it happy terrestrialized into a fairy type and send them to the moon with boosted Terra Blast. It was delightfully deadly in not one but two tiers, until the DLC came around. Turns out all of those cool new traits only really amounted to anything with less options. Once it opened up, Wyrdeer proved to be insufficient at meaningfully improving upon Stantler's status, and that was just the first DLC too, with the second unnecessarily but even more thoroughly ensuring it was done for. It's a shame because it's not like it was building off of Stantler's ill-fitting profile, because that would have been easy to see failing, but even this practically entirely new Pokemon couldn't muster even PU status. Remember that whole thing about not being worse than Stantler's untiered status? Well, it's technically true because, well, it isn't worse, but being untiered, Wyrdeer is quite literally just as poorly off as the Pokemon it evolved from. Electivire is renowned among fans as one of the most disappointing Pokemon in the game. Its tail bears some surface similarity to Dusknoir, but it is in actuality far more tragic. Noir's fall you could see coming, as it simply was too similar to a Pokemon that was already highly flawed. Yvire, on the other hand, takes the Electabuzz playstyle in a different direction. It is slower than Ebuzz, but its speed is still quite good, and theoretically, it seems like quite the fair trade-off for what Yvire gains upon evolving. Not the slightly higher HP and defense, that's nice, but doesn't make much of a difference. No, we're talking the mammoth plus 40 jump in base attack from Electabuzz's 83 to Electivire's 123. We're talking the addition of Flamethrower to its moveset. We're talking Motor Drive as its ability. If Yvire comes into an electric move, it gets a speed boost, and suddenly its fierce attacking capabilities become a lot fiercer. It famously hit almost every type in the game for super effective coverage, and with an expert belt attached, those hits stung even more. In early Diamond and Pearl, Yvire was a defining threat, famously pairing with Gyarados, a terrifying dragon dancer many would attempt to levy electric moves towards, only for an unrevealed Yvire to switch in, gain the Motor Drive boost, and be off to the races. So what went wrong? Well, for all its hard hitting and ability to go fast, Electivire was still not strong or fast enough. It was awful because it was almost so good, and yet in not reaching that status, it didn't wind up being good or decent or okay. It instead fell flat on its face into a grisly puddle of being completely terrible. Its physical electric stab was the appallingly weak Thunder Punch, completely undercutting its great attack. It barely threatened Skarmory. Sure, it could go mixed with Thunderbolt, but then it wasn't just hitting off of its weaker special attack stat, but had to split up its EVs, and its issues with power remained pronounced. It struggled with bulky grounds. Nothing it did touched Hippowdon, and without Hidden Power Grass, it was completely hapless against Swampert, but it couldn't slot Hidden Power Grass in without making some serious moveset concessions. It struggled to fit in anywhere near everything it needed, with Ice Punch and Cross Chop and Earthquake and Flamethrower and even the attack boosting Meditate also all vying for slots. Okay, so Yvire's not great into bulky teams, but surely it blitzed past frailer offensive teams. Once again, no. Its speed, while good, left it revenge killed by most of the tier's choice scarfers, and its poor physical bulk meant picking it off with popular priority didn't pose much of a problem either. Oh, and no matter what it did, it was utterly worthless into the Rotom appliances that also happened to outclass it, meaning Platinum ensured it was buried even deeper under the ground than before. Remember how we said Yvire was a major threat in early Diamond and Pearl? We didn't just mean early Gen 4, we meant Diamond and Pearl, specifically pre-Platinum, because by the time the midway point of the nascent, still developing metagame came around, the player base had quickly realized that, as scary as it seemed with that Motor Drive boost, Yvire wound up being spectacularly disappointing, and this was even before the Rotom appliances, forget after. However, Electivire was like Dusknoir in that, though its horrendous flaws were readily apparent to any experienced player, its upsides seemed quite appealing to newer ones. Gyravire quickly went from meta-defining duel to noob strategy. However, this noob strategy was popular and kept Yvire's usage sufficiently high throughout the generation to prevent it from dropping to UU, where it either would have fit in nicely or been hilariously broken, or maybe somewhere in between. We'll never know for sure, because instead, Yvire was doomed to forever be a joke. Forget improving on the Electabuzz line's solid competitive history, Yvire wound up becoming one of the most famous flops in Pokemon and never managed to redeem itself in subsequent generations either. Girafarig, beyond baton passing agilities over GSC UU so hard it got the strategy banned, which is admittingly very cool, has had a meager non-existence of a competitive history, with an awkward inability to pull off much of anything successfully. Any interesting possibilities consistently undermined by its strange typing that its low stats don't let it get the most out of. However, like Stantler, it received a new normal psychic form in Scarlet and Violet, Farigiraf, which actually bore many similarities to Wyrdeer's playstyle, but Farigiraf was much more terrifying and aggressive. It was a little slower, but with agility, that wasn't much of an issue. Its defenses at base 70 were similar, but Farigiraf packed a monstrous base 120 HP stat. For reference, this is the same as Arceus and Cresselia. It also hit harder, first because of its superior base 110 special attack stat, and second, because it wasn't boosting its special attack with Calm Mind, but instead Nasty Plot. Oh yeah, forget bypassing its boosted speed with priority, because the Armor Tail ability would stop any such attempts in their tracks. Farigiraf's Double Dance set found success in even early RU, as well as terrorizing early NU and even PU. If not going the grassy seed route, it could even opt for Kudchu as its ability to get a second use of Citrus or Lumberry, or it could go with Sap Sipper to give itself an excellent grass immunity, increasing where it could set up, and as a bonus, its potential attack boost for switching into a grass move could strengthen stored power even more. Additionally, it wasn't restricted to its Double Dance set. It could run a fierce offensive Trick Room variant, which did away with the speed investment required for agility and poured it into bulk, increasing opportunities and using Side Shock as a stab for a far greater immediacy to its threat, not needing to boost before it could attack like it did with stored power. Plus, it could even go with a superb bulky utility set that combined hit taking with the team support of Wish Passing and even Future Sight. So what happened that wound up dropping Farigiraf into the same desolate land of Untiered where you knew in your heart of hearts it would end up? Well, the same as Wyrdeer, pretty much. One might think that Farigiraf would be better equipped for the onslaught of DLC power creep. After all, those things bring a lot of power, and Farigiraf had a great deal of that. Theoretically, it could fit in better in such situations. However, it just wasn't enough. As great as its possibilities for Terror were, Fire, Fairy, Electric, Steel, they weren't enough to let it keep up with the truly ridiculous barrage of Gen 9 brutality, even less so the second time around. Farigiraf's design is so great, you really wished it worked, and for a time it did, but that time was gone quite quickly, and thus any hopes of having it leave a lasting improvement for the Girafarig line's competitive history were tragically dashed. There is a positive footnote to this too, which is why this isn't just a rehash of the Wyrdeer story. By virtue of gaining an evolution, Girafarig became eligible for Little Cup, and it absolutely destroyed that metagame, shattering it with utter hilarity and getting itself banned. As a result, it is actually the more successful of its evolutionary line in singles, but this is specifically because it has an evolutionary line to begin with. So you could make the argument that Farigiraf did in fact improve its evolutionary line. It just didn't do so directly. And by the way, if you're wondering why this didn't happen to Stantler, it's because it can't actually evolve in Scarlet and Violet, as Wyrdeer is only accessible through home transfer from Legends Arceus. To be eligible for Little Cup, a Pokemon must be able to evolve in-game, thereby disqualifying Stantler. Dunsparce is an entirely bland Pokemon that pretty much gets tossed onto teams trying to cram as much Serene Grace as possible. And even with this most absurd ability, it fails to achieve anything because it's so bland with its unimpressive stats and pure normal typing. The Dunsparce is like a better version of this, as its bulk is actually quite decent, and so it can theoretically pull some Coil Roost shenanigans with Stab Body Slam, or act as a stealth rocking wall, but it and its move pool aren't anywhere near enough to compensate for the typing. Terastallization helps, but even then it's not that tanky, and you don't want to burn Terra on a Pokemon that absolutely needs it to function because of how limiting that is. And even with Terra, it's not that good. It's an honorable mention because it's just so bland. And us fans thought Dunsparce's evolution would be some cool dragon thing, but sadly it just got an extra segment. Why? Kleavor, on the other hand, is actually quite a good Pokemon and sits in RU, several tiers above Scyther, which is historically a great lower tier Pokemon itself. It's an honorable mention because, well, Scyther's other evolution is one of the best Pokemon in the game, full stop. Finishing this off is quite a curious case, as Mr. Rime is not as direct a cross-generational evolution of Mr. Mime as the others have been. Instead, it and Galarian Mr. Mime came about in the same generation, but we think they merit being mentioned, especially because what they did was so interesting. With its newly gained half ice typing, Galarian Mr. Mime basically pretends to be Jinx, while the same typed Mr. Rime slows down, hitting much harder and gaining some nice bulk in exchange, accentuating the latter with Slack Off. They were distinct from each other in that they didn't really outclass each other, as they were used in different ways, despite their similarities with their stabs bolstered by Nasty Plot, heavy duty boots, and the team utility combined with speed boosting of Rapid Spin. This led to both of them being used in the same tier multiple times. They started in NU together thanks to the tier's dearth of hazard removal, placing great importance on their access to Rapid Spin. Then Galarian Mr. Mime actually stayed in NU thanks to its better speed, while Mr. Rime dropped to PU and reigned with its choice spec set smacking pretty much everything in the tier that wasn't especially defensive Mr. Rime. After Mr. Mime had stayed in NU for seemingly being better than Mr. Rime, it wound up dropping to PU, where it wasn't used very much at first because it was pretty much outclassed by Mr. Rime. However, the addition of the metagame defining Clink Clank to the tier gave Mr. Mime that aforementioned status of being distinct from its evolution, as being able to outspeed Mr. Rime was a major part of what made Clink Clank so good, and thus Mr. Mime being able to outspeed Clink Clank was similarly important, thus giving it a significant niche as cosplaying Mr. Mr. Rime without the hindrance of being Kling Klang bait. Of course, Mr. Rime was still excellent, and so it continued to be used alongside its pre-evolution. Both Pokemon seemed like they would utterly dominate upon Kling Klang's eventual ban, but a mere 2 weeks later, Tier Shifts returned Kling Klang to NU, in addition to other monsters the two struggled to deal with like Liepard and Kangaskhan, whose position in the metagame was so dominant that both of them pretty much disappeared entirely. Well, back to PU, right? Nah, the Crown Tundra's power creep ensured they were done for there too. Most notably, they were just absurdly outclassed by Jinx. Forget cosplaying when the real deal shows up, and even Jinx itself was so flawed in the tier that it too was untiered. So these two stood nary a chance even if they did have Rapid Spin. In a sense, this example of the Mr. Mime family is perfectly emblematic of this video's concept. Mr. Rime so decidedly failed to completely improve upon his evolution in the way that is expected that it was regularly used alongside it, and at one point was even in a lower tier than it. And that's it. Most cross-generational evolutions are quite effective at bolstering the Pokemon they're supposed to, which is why cases like these are generally anomalies, as even lesser evolutions still bring marked improvements over their pre-evolution statuses, relatively speaking to what they should be at least. We think we got the most significant cases, but if someone wants to make an argument for Galarian Slowbro or something, we'd be happy to hear them. Either way, let us know what you think in the comments, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to Fall Swipe Game for more weekly Pokemon content, and thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And thank you so much to our Platinum tier patrons. Thank you so much to Raven Daytona Ring, Sorazon Croxon, Stoneface Colin, Bingleton, Ray, Daniel Isbeast, Glitcherton, Alex Sabo, Funky, Skylaria, and Jack G for their support of our videos.